Well, hello and welcome to SOC Unlocked, Tales from the Cybersecurity Front Lines. I'm Mick, your host and guide on this exciting journey into the SOC universe. In each episode, I chat with various cybersecurity professionals about the latest in industry news, emerging threats, and practical strategies to keep your organization safe, as well as much more. And today, I'm excited to have a dear friend of mine, Dave Kennedy. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mick. Really appreciate you having me on, and such a pleasure to be here and talk to everybody.
Yeah. So I will say this, Dave is the first repeat guest that I've had. Such a dear friend and a good man is willing to come back on the show. We must not have messed up too badly the first
Well,
time.
you
So I'm
waited a
great.
year at least, so I wasn't as scared coming back on the second time. So,
I love it. I love it. Well, so Dave, tell us, surely everyone knows about you, but there might be somebody brand new into the industry who's like, Dave, who? You'll learn soon. But Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and how you got here.
yeah, absolutely. Started my career off really working for the NSA doing cyber warfare. I was a United States Marine. Well, I shouldn't say was. You have to say always is a United States Marine once. And it's interesting enough. My 15-year-old son is going to sign on the dotted line as soon as he turns 18 to become a Marine as well. So,
I love it.
but I did cyber warfare for the intelligence community for a number of years. Got out. I was part of a small consulting shop, then became the chief security officer for Diebold, where I ran a global cybersecurity program for a number of years, and then started my own two companies. So I'm the founder of Trusted Sec and Binary Defense. We got about 400 folks worldwide, focusing on everything from penetration testing, red teaming, application security, governance, and everything else to monitoring and detection. We have a 24/7 security operations center, mostly on the managed detection and response side. And we focus on protecting people every day. And our motto is to make the world a safer place. And that's built into our culture and, everything we do. But I'm a very technical person in nature. I love programming. I wrote the social engineer toolkit. I wrote the book with a few co-authors of mine, Metasploit the Penetration Tester's Guide, Magic Unicorn, a number of open source exploitation framework tools. And my biggest focus as of late has been artificial intelligence and how that can, impact both offense and defense and what that means for us moving forward. So a lot of cool stuff to talk about today, I think.
Yeah, I agree. First and foremost. So first, I want to say thank you for your service and for that of your son who's
Good.
getting
Yeah.
ready to sign up. There's just no greater service I think one can offer than to serve their country. So grateful for
Agreed.
that.
Yeah.
But you're on the front lines of this stuff. I mean, every day seeing this stuff, and you're not some a non-technical executive that sits in an ivory tower office, right? You're down. You've still got a lab. You're still tinkering. I know that.
All the time.
Longtime user both of Set and Metasploit. So thanks for that. Appreciate all the work there. But what this means to me is that you're seeing it day in and day out. What's maybe a recent shift or change that you've seen SOCs face, through the industry?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the big things for me is at Trusted Sec, I'm the CEO, but at Binary Defense, I have no direct reports, and my title is the Chief Hacking Officer, which is cool when you run your own company, you kind of make your own title or whatever, right? What's important for me is focusing on, our innovation in those areas so that we can continuously compete on the market, but also stay really forward thinking on what attackers are doing, how, things are evolving, and making sure that we can meet the demands of our customers to go and do that. And so, a lot of my projects are, skunk work type stuff where I'm basically building prototypes or proof of concepts or full-fledged applications to help augment our security operations center, our threat intelligence team, our threat hunting team, our detection engineering teams, to be more faster to get the things, to respond to things much more efficiently. And I think, if you look at what's happening in the attack industry, it's very similar to what we saw kind of with the cloud adoption side. So if you look at cloud infrastructure, there was a large period of time where attackers really didn't focus on cloud infrastructure because they were so used to on-premise. But then you started to see a shift where they recognized, hey, lesser visibility into cloud infrastructure, lesser ability to get detected, but also, the ability to have everything from a cloud infrastructure side to be able to compromise. And then from there, either handle intellectual property theft or ransomware events, things like that. And so you saw this focus now where attackers shifted to cloud. We're seeing the same thing kind of on the artificial intelligence side of the house too, where, the ability, if you think about it, the way that ransomware models used to really work is you had some really skilled individuals that were really good at hacking in the organized crime side of the house, right? And they were really smart, really technical. They would build, ransomware as a service, or they'd have a service that was for circumventing multi-factor authentication. They specialize in that area, or phishing campaigns. You had all these different groups. You had low bar ones that were, just phishing and trying to get credentials, and they sell those credentials on the market. And then from there, you get a more sophisticated attacker that would then leverage it. So there's this whole like underground market, right? What AI has really done is it's helped, instead of having a very small subset of hacker population that could generate ransomware as a service or prototypes for like a C2 or things like that. Now with Gen AI, you have the ability to code this type of stuff, through vibe coding and everything else, and not have a full understanding of what's occurring, to be able to prototype and build these things much faster. So you have a larger population pool now of hackers that have these tools that can continuously innovate and develop very quickly. And we've seen, groups like, for example, there was one that recently where they were leveraging customized Lua scripts that were dynamically generated, where they would get initial access, and the code that was executed was dynamically generated every single time per individual access. So, how do you detect that as a defender, right? It's brand new code that's being cranked out. It's completely new every single time. And so things like, where you would be able to determine things like, hey, it's heavily encrypted or obfuscated, that has indicators in there. Now it's legitimate looking code that's being executed and developed, from an LLM. It's allowing attackers to kind of evolve onto that to get more successful with what they're doing. And so as defenders, we kind of have to shore up our game. And even at Trusted Sec, we leverage AI very heavily. We have a C2 called Scoutmaster, which is our main C2 that we use, that we've developed internally over the past several years. And, it kind of is like you choose your own destiny type of video game now, because once we get initial access, it'll help the operator understand that environment very quickly and where it should navigate to. So if you think of a security program's detection capabilities, it's like a minefield. And a lot of companies are very focused on, kind of commodities. So they might just, have an EDR tool, but they don't customize it to their own environment. Or they might have a detection program and they use out of the box detections. Well, if I have a blueprint of your landmines, I know not to step left. I know not to step right. I just move forward, or I move to the left, or move to the right, knowing there's not any mines there. And so, we can leverage, LLMs very heavily for that, to say, hey, based on the technology that is there, this command is going to trigger a specific type of event that gets you detected. So, it's allowing capabilities to expand much faster, but it's also very much helping on the defensive side. Our biggest challenge in defense is just the amount of data that we have to sift through. It's always that noise ratio. It's find that needle in the haystack. It's, combing through copious amounts of false positives to where you find one true positive. And that's where I think AI really has a big synergy with defense, because it can really interpret large volumes of structured and unstructured data very quickly. And if you train that model right, it can speed up your time to actually identify things that are very malicious that an analyst should actually go after much more faster, and help reprioritize things. Like, for example, during the very early stages of an attack, it's what we call the reconnaissance phase. Let's just say you get initial access and you compromise a host. Well, a lot of times you have to do additional enumeration steps. Who are the domain admins? What privilege levels am I running under? What's their network architecture and infrastructure look like? What tools do they have on their systems that might cause me an issue? Do I need to circumvent EDRs? Do I need to do this? And so, when those types of early warning indicators come up, they might be, very non-suspicious type of activity. If someone's, doing who am I, or looking at a net user command, that might generate a low to medium volume alarm that takes time to actually go through. Well, we can interpret that and piece together multiple alarms and say, hey, based on the behavior that this user is exhibiting, this is now critical, because, this is early warning reconnaissance phases that we should now be investigating very quickly. So it helps with the prioritization much faster than we ever could. So I think there's a lot of really cool things happening there.
I love it. It sounds like you're chaining together a number of events. Things like, yeah, you logged in, it's a successful login with MFA, however, from a different device or a different, location than we've seen before. Maybe that's not bad. People travel. I get it. We both do a lot. And so that's by itself not bad. But then we see, login, access to things. We see commands that are unusual, right? Who am I? Really? Why? You already know who you are, right? You typically know what you're logged in as. Um, so yeah, I love the fact that we can start to, you know, i- improve the efficacy of those detections. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, if you think about analysts, they're very linear, right? So you have an alarm come in, they analyze that alarm. You have another alarm, they analyze that alarm. Whereas with AI, what we do is we can contextualize all of those alarms and paint that big picture of what that behavior is actually being exhibited there. It's very different than a traditional techniques based detection that you build, right? yes, if a regular user runs regsvr32 under the context of a regular user account using this scripted object and it's going out to the internet, well, hey, that's probably a clear indication from a detection techniques perspective that is malicious, right? So that one to one is been there. If you have good detections, you can see that. But really, where the power of AI comes in is it's actually interpreting the behavior of the full picture of what's happening on that system. And if you can provide that to a model that you train very well, it can be a very big synergy to how fast you can actually respond to it. And so one of the projects that I've been working on, which has been my baby for the past 9 months, is an internal project called Night Beacon. And Night Beacon, what it is it's our own large language model that we train. But the big thing with models is that the contextual data, the metadata that you give it, has to be very spot on, or it's not going to be able to train that model well. And that's where you see most AI projects fail today, is because they're trying to have it do something that they don't have a good data point to train that model off of a business process, whether it's financial analytics or accounts receivable, accounting, whatever that is, legal, whatever it ends up being. If you don't train that data off of your specific organization or company, it's not going to be a good model. It's not going to provide you a lot of benefits, which is why there's a stat out there that 87% of all AI based projects fail today. And that's because, you really have to have good training data for it. And so when I was looking at this whole AI situation, I'm like, well, where is there injection points into my analysts that can provide really good learning to that model to be better over time? And so what I did is, so Night Beacon has a beautiful web UI, made it like very cyberpunk techno-ish, with flashy lights and things like that. It looks really cool. But they don't actually even use the UI because it's all in the back end. And so what happens is, all of our alarms come into our SOAR, which does data enrichment, goes to our threat intelligence platform, our detections, everything else, centralizes it so an analyst has a central pane of glass that they can look at to really paint a full picture of what's occurring. But on the background, what it does is it queries Night Beacon and says, hey, is this malicious or not? And provide, a write up and understanding and a breakdown of what's actually occurring. It has code analyzers built into it. So if there's code as part of it, it'll interpret the code to see whether or not that dynamic code, maybe that's being generated through Lua scripts that we talked about before, if that's malicious in nature. And then the really cool part of how it actually trains is based off of our analyst behavior. So if our analysts then submit it as a true positive to our customers, it retrains that model with all of the analyst notes and recommendations and everything to train that model better. If it's a false positive, it does the same thing. And then we also have a feedback loop with our customers. So if our customers confirm it as a true positive, the weighting then gets increased from a probability. If we see that again in the future, automatically bubble that up to our organization. And then I took it a little bit of a step further, and I created this application called Nexus, which, with models, you have to have good training data. But a lot of times, if there's a new exploit or a new attack or something new in the wild that's happening that we don't have a lot of good training data on, well, how do you don't want to wait until you see it from your analyst side. And so what Nexus will do is it'll take, a proof of concept or a research paper or IOCs or a tweet, and it'll analyze that component, and it'll build training data specifically off of that research paper so that we can train our model now to recognize that in the future. So we're trying to hit it on multiple fronts so that our analysts can respond much faster. And then we took another step further with automatically recommending things like playbooks to execute. So, for example, if we know that this is a critical and it's a very high probability of being malicious, we can execute specific playbooks automatically to contain that host, pull out all the IOCs, grab all the information from the systems automatically, and then have that come back in so the analyst can make very fast responses without having to, do a lot of detailed analysis for it.
I love it, man. I mean, it sounds like you're really building this from end to end, and that's what's really exciting, and using the data to continue to sharpen itself and make itself smarter every time. So, are you monitoring specific feeds on X, for example? X has been such a great source of intel because it's so current. And if you're following the right folks, I mean, we've been doing that for quite some time in terms of consuming data out of it. But I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody using that data to feed and make AI solutions more intelligent. That's really neat to hear.
Yeah, X still is the number one threat intelligence platform that's out there. I mean, security researchers, malware reversers, they want to get that information out as quick as possible. And if you look at it, especially when major things are happening, whether it's a new Fortinet zero day or something else, you want very quick. You don't want to wait for a research paper that takes 4 weeks to come out or things like that, right? How do we get those IOCs very quickly? And one thing I also built into it is this what's called a rules framework. So think of it as kind of traditional technique based driven detections. But what it is it's generative AI based. So you can say if I ever see registrar32 with a scriptlet object and it's communicating out to the internet, then raise the probability ranking for this by 80%. And it'll create a new rule so that if we don't have training data yet for it, it'll still automatically recognize that specific threat as it comes in. So if you look at something like Hafnium, for example, where the um, exchange process was spawning, the spool service was spawning sub processes that were not unique to markup chaining or what was normally within that process. We can build detections very fast in that environment and then automatically have it be sent into our analysts to find it real time. So we try to hit it from all different angles around how much data is available. Do we even have enough data to actually train it at that point in time? And then if not, then we go to the rules as kind of a fallback to make sure that we can still catch it. And that's really where I think the power of AI is heading towards is, I'm still not on the whole movement is like, you have to have agentic AI to automatically take action and on behalf of agents and things like that. And while that's important, I think in the future, you don't want that AI model still making decisions on behalf. You still have to have that analyst component there. Now, there's certain situations where it's like, hey, 100% probability this is malicious. We've seen it before in the wild. You can take things like automatic containment. I agree with that, but there's still a huge interpretation layer for analysts that need to be there. And we still rely very heavily on our tier one or tier two or tier three SOC analysts, and that's not going away anytime soon or in the future. I just want to emphasize that, like, this is an augmentation tool to our security operations center, to our analysts to help them respond faster and to really whittle out that noise. Like, our biggest problem in the SOC today is, they'll get, 1,000 false positives, and in those 1,000 false positives, there's one true positive, but they get alarm fatigue and they keep going through it over and over and over again. They're used to just hitting false positive, and they might miss a specific issue. So how do we, reduce that from happening? One is obviously the, tuning out false positives to reduce those over time within a customer environment. But two, it's also giving them the right information to make that right specific assessment so they can escalate that to a customer as fast as possible. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish with it.
Yeah, I love it. I'm glad you touched on that as far as AI displacing humans and the unlikelihoodness, whatever, of that happening. I was on a panel this week up at Sector, and one of my fellow panelists said, "Yeah, I see AI replacing tier one analysts," and I was like, I don't. Because now, do I see tier one becoming it's shifting. The work that you do shifts. And what tier one is responsible for may now include what used to be tier three and potentially even, or tier two and then potentially tier three work. But I think the roles are still there. To your point, human in the loop is still going to be necessary. Yes, there are opportunities for us to let the AI at times when we have high confidence detections, go ahead and take action, and then we'll circle back with that human in the loop and validate the action
That's right.
relatively quickly. But if we have the opportunity to remediate something right in the moment, we would be silly not to do that and then double check the work from the AI. Now to your point, that's not smart to do every time, but we can definitely do it from time to time.
Yeah, Mick, I think you hit the right point there, which is, for me, the way that I look at this is that, tier one SOC analysts will be augmented by what we see from AI, right? It's not a replacement. And what's important to note about that is, for folks that are listening to this that are in the SOC analyst side, I'd really, encourage you to be familiar with, how prompt coding, vibe coding works, how to leverage AI to benefit you to interpret data much faster. If you're a MSSP or an MDR provider, integrating that into your process so that you can be more efficient at what you're doing, but you still need those eyes on glass to really understand what's occurring in that environment, because a lot of times it really is centric to that customer. It's not a traditional, like, hey, someone's dropping a binary and executing a Metasploit payload or a Cobalt Strike payload or a Brute Retel payload. They're very unique in how it works. And, AI isn't going to be able to interpret that in any way, shape, or form. It can provide context to that. But a lot of times it's going to be a legitimate business process, or a lot of times it's going to be something abnormal, but it's still legitimate in nature. And right now we're kind of in this big hype cycle of AI. It hit us like a ton of bricks, right? And in cybersecurity, we're probably one of the most prone industries to the marketing fluff that comes out of that. Every year it's next generation or EDRs or AI. We have
Zero
the
trust.
biggest, yeah, zero trust, DLP. It's every year it's a big buzzword that hits our hype cycle, but eventually goes down and it normalizes into what's actually possible. Today, what you're seeing is now you're seeing all these autonomous SOCs. SOC in a box where you literally just pipe your logs to, and all of a sudden now you have a security operations center that's run by robots. It's all marketing fluff. They have to do massive integrations into APIs. Most of the time, they don't have those right APIs. Most of the time, it doesn't work well. And then when you get it into your environment, you're going to have a million false positives, or you're going to get commodity alarms, and you're going to miss all the other stuff that's out there. Again, there's a long ways for us to go before that even becomes a theory or a probability that that type of thing actually happens. And I just don't see it with how LLMs work. I mean, the thing about how they actually work, it's trying to you know, large language models are trying to predict the next word in the sequence. Okay. So that's kind of how they work. They take what it's learned and it tries to predict what's next. And so if you look at that, the scalability, first of all, we're so far away from AGI. And I know Sam Altman says artificial general intelligence is happening every 6 months, and then every 6 months it's not even close. If you look at the latest GPT release, it was very fractional in its growth. So we're starting to see the slowdown of models from a learning perspective. And until we have things like probably quantum computing and things like that, we're not really going to hit AGI very quickly. So we have a long ways to go before we even know what that is or what it's going to do to impact the industry. And for me, diving down into this and really building my own, AI learning capabilities, it has a whole subset of limitations that, it's not possible to automate that without having analysts in place. And so, it's going to make our jobs more efficient. It's going to make our jobs a little bit easier, which is what we want. And it's going to make our jobs much more successful in having to comb through so much data. And I think that's really where the strengths come into place is how do we get more efficient in cybersecurity to identify what's really wrong in the environment faster and quicker, and that's what we have to do and innovate. And I would say for any analyst that's out there, augment yourself with AI. How can it make my job easier or better? How do I inject processes in place that can help me out to learn things faster? That's really where I think the synergies are there.
Yeah, but Dave, the agentic AI, that's what's going to be the next thing. That's what's going to save us, right?
They have
The
everything. You
engine.
just spin up an agent, and it's funny because the whole vibe coding thing's taking off in a lot of
Yeah.
organizations where they're starting to develop enterprise applications, and so we get to do a lot of source code analysis and dynamic testing of applications. And we've seen a 700% increase in vulnerabilities in these applications that are developed, right? And it's funny because like if I were to code a full enterprise application just using prompt engineering, which is doable, but it's going to be riddled with a ton of bugs, ton of
Yes.
security issues, and the
Yes.
code base is going to be 100% unmanageable. So I did this as a proof of concept. So I wrote it was for I play a lot of airsoft,
Hmm.
and I wrote this new game called Fallout, and it's you have to get to the White House and you have to hack the White House. It's like a post-apocalyptic, situation where there's two factions battling for control, and so you got to get to the White House and you got to hack the nuclear launch codes. And so like it's a web application that has like glitchy screens and Fallout music, and you have to hold the place for 3 minutes, and then you get your nuclear launch codes, and you got to take the nuclear launch codes to the missile silos and then launch the nukes, and then you win the game. Okay, so I did a experiment with that, and I decided to develop one leveraging just prompt based engineering, and then I decided to develop one on my own, using my normal coding skills. And what was interesting is that the application that was Gen I based coding was 17,000 lines of code, and my one that I wrote was 317 lines of code.
My goodness.
So just to put in perspective, the code management situation, with these types of things aren't using, best practices in many cases. And you can do things like rule sets that, say, hey, make the code as small as possible, use secure coding practices, do this, but it's still very, very far out from actually being able to be like a subject matter expert within development, things like that. And then what they're saying with agentic AI is like, hey, you could be a good developer, but then your workforce is going to be a bunch of agents that are doing the coding for you. I'm telling you, man, like it's going to be a disaster for a little while. We're back in the Web 2.0 boom with SQL injection and cross-site scripting and everything else. It's all coming back, full fledged with what we're seeing now with vibe coding.
Well, yeah, and at least in my own experience, and would love to hear your take on this. generative AI is so, um, eh, eh, so positioned to please you, right? It wants to give you an answer that it thinks you want.
So for
So,
the
you
first
know,
time, by the way, just a funny story.
yeah,
For the first time ever, I swore at my LLM prompt because it wasn't doing things right. I was getting so frustrated that I actually put some. And by the way, its response back was so nice, so nice. It's like, "I'm so sorry, I'm messing this up. I'll make sure I do better in the future." I'm like, "Okay, I can't be mad at you, AI." But I
right?
just swear at my prompts.
Dude, I'm so glad I'm not the only one that has, like, a conversation with it
Yeah,
as well, because I was like, "Dude, you are dropping this, you're blowing this.
yeah.
What is the matter? Why
Like,
do
I'm
you
not
need
sure
to
what
fix?"
happened. You were working fine yesterday, but today you really suck at life. Like, what is
Right?
going on? I'm so
And I
sorry.
remember it was like, "I'm so sorry, Mick. You have every right to be frustrated with
Yeah.
me. Here's what I did wrong, and here's how I'm gonna fix it." I was like, "Well,
Can't be mad at you.
I can't be mad. I can't hold a grudge against you, AI." I mean, we call it Chatty at my house. I don't know what you've nicknamed it at your house. We call it Chatty. So my whole family now leverages generative AI, primarily an open AI family, but I love Claude as well. I'm not holding grudges. Gemini, you've got a long way to go. At any rate, so everybody in my family refers to her as Chatty, and I've gotten mad at Chatty a few times, and she's just I can't hold a grudge against her though. She's so kind.
So nice. So nice.
But what a time to be alive, right?
Yeah.
I finally waited long enough in terms of my lack of SQL skills that now I don't have to write. I'd never really had to learn it and call my buddy Stephen Dumont to help me write a query. Now with natural language query, I can just write in natural language. Here's what I want you to do, and it does. It's fantastic.
That's where my development time has sped up 700%, right?
Me
Because like I'll
too.
be like, "Hey, I need to write a new API for this new application." And so I'll be like, "Hey, go to this SDK and interpret their API language, build me a API connector that integrates into this application." And then, I have the granular control to control just that code, that module that I'm going to be adding into my application to then run that specific query for that API to get the right data back to parse it the right way. Like normally that would take me, let's just say 3 days to write. Now I have in 5 minutes. That's awesome. That's powerful. And the hallucinations that were happening, if you start looking at like coding 6 months ago or 10 months ago, the hallucinations were absolutely horrible. It's gotten so much better over just the past 6 months for how rapid you can prototype things or build things very quickly without massive flaws or bugs in the code. It's getting substantially better. So that, goes back to that whole thing of, if you're a developer or you're a security researcher or you're a SOC analyst, have it leverage AI to help speed up your time to go and do things. We have this one piece that John Dwyer, who's our CTO, he's been focusing on this, which is being an MDR provider. We're what's called an open MDR. So we support pretty much every technology. We don't care if you have Splunk or QRadar or Devo or Sentinel. Doesn't make a difference to us. We support all technology. Same thing for EDRs. It's Sentinel One or CrowdStrike. It doesn't make a difference. Our biggest challenge has always been, how do we get detections out to all of those customers in their own environments real time? And that's where we created this detection engineering as code component, which allows us to rapidly deploy new detections out to our customers through one detection. So we can write one detection, AI will automatically translate that, all of it, all that for us. And then it'll automatically put it into our CI/CD pipeline. It'll retroactively look back 30 days and
Oh,
give us the results back to say, hey, is this generating 10,000 false positives? How do we tune this to be even better? And we can push detections out to our customers in a few minutes versus a week. And so our time to be able to do that from a detection perspective has astronomically increased because we're leveraging that type of technology to go and do it.
dude, this is so cool. This is so cool. I mean, even just helping customers if they want to port from let's say they're QRadar today and then want to port over to Splunk. And I mean, I remember the hassle
Yeah.
of trying to rewrite everything, and because the
Making
languages
sure
are
the data
different.
lines up properly,
Oh
the
my
the
gosh.
format types, because everybody uses a completely different structure for how they parse their data. There's not one standard language.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And then let alone, I mean, first of all, let me just pause here and just say thank you for being a company that supports, companies where they are with the tech stack they already have. You don't require them to make a new investment. Oh, I'm sorry. We
Gotta
only
use this proprietary solution that you're gonna send it out
oh,
to.
that's even
That
worse,
was one of
right?
the big things for us when we started Binary Defense was, like an organization already has a monumental, investment, not just from a monetary value, but how their people are comfortable with it, the subject matter experts in those areas that go and leverage it. And so we go to a lot of these black box solutions. It's like, hey, just send all of your data to us, and we're going to magically take care of it. You're not going to know our detections. You're not going to know what we actually look for. You're just going to get that alarm as it comes through. And to me, that's doing a big disservice for this industry because let's just say a customer comes to buy their defense and they're a customer of ours for 3 years, but they decide, hey, our parent company wants us to use a standard organization and they don't want to leverage you. So now, we have to move away from you, or maybe we're building our own internal SOC. We no longer need a third party. And so you shouldn't be starting from ground zero again in your monitor detection program. So that's why it's really important for us when we build detections and we build logic, we do reduction of false positives. It's in their own technology, it's in their own environment. So at the end of the day, if they leave us after 3 years, they have all those detections that we've written for them, completely transparent into their own environment. To me, that's making their security program better, having, locking them into us so they have to use us, in any way, shape, or form. If there's a better fit out there, there's something new out there, go for it, do it, but don't sacrifice, 3 years of evolution in your security program for that. And I think that's where, it's really hard to communicate that to customers that just want the easiest solution possible. It's like, hey, send it to this magic black box and it's going to do all this magic stuff. It's probably not the best, but hey, it's going to work for us. We don't like that. We don't like that model.
No, and I don't either. Frankly, I don't know anybody that does. Yeah, thanks for being a good corporate citizen. I mean, like, a digital partner, helping folks, solve their problems, but also, you're not locking them in. You're not trapping them. I love that. I love that. Plus, you let them bring what they have to the table, right? If you're Sentinel one shop, fine, we got you. You CrowdStrike, okay, great. You have some weird homegrown EDR, fine. We can still help you, monitor your environment. I love that. I love that. So
Absolutely. Big important thing for us. Our motto, I mentioned it earlier, but it's to make the world a better place, right? And that's driven into our culture, it's driven into our people. We always do the right thing. We're not perfect, but we'll own it. Like if we mess up, we're gonna own it immediately and figure out how it happened so that it never happens again. And it's not like one of those things that's like, well, hey, you didn't give us this one log. Wait, we should have told you we should have had that log. Like that's our fault for not telling you we should have had that log. Like, so we need to get that log so we can do this in the future. So it's really important for us just to continuously work with them. And we always have this motto, an extension of your security team. So, they work with the same analysts day in and day out that are familiar with their own environment. When you call the number, you get a person directly right away. You're not, going through some crazy system to get to something. If there's an incident, we hop on Zoom calls immediately or whatever to triage and go through it. It's like you have a full team behind you working with you. And that was really how we architected the entire company, was just to really be that extension of your security team.
yeah, and candidly, I think that's the right move. And not paid to say that. I have been a customer of yours when I was at a big insurance company in Columbus. We used Trusted Sec before to as a pen test company, and you embarrassed me a little bit and my
Hey.
team. Oh man, you guys are great. You
We
guys are great.
match ourselves to the program itself. So, we
Yeah,
have folks that are just absolutely amazing and we still destroy them, because we have
and
to
you
have those
did.
capabilities, to test a program to continuously make it better, right? And that's
Yes,
really a focus of ours, is like understanding where your security program's at today, where do you want to go and how do we get you there, to get you there the best way we possibly can. And so, for us, it's not like, we do love going in and owning, customers and
sure.
companies. It's a pride thing for us. But at the same time, it's always doing what's best for that organization to get better. And I think that's the important piece here, that, it's not a commodity. It's just not another customer. It's more so like, hey, what are they struggling with? Where can we help them at? And just having the best folks that can actually go and do it.
Yeah, no, I will say that's what I loved most, right? Is that, yes, it highlighted some things that we knew it highlighted a few things we knew about, highlighted a few things we didn't know about, and helped us really get shine a spotlight on some areas that we needed to, invest in, and that really unlocked the wallet, if you will, to go and fix some of those areas that we knew we needed to work on for quite some time. So, at any rate, fantastic stuff. I love it. And that's what makes this an exciting time to be in cybersecurity. I love the mission of your company. Mine here at Abnormal is to stop cybercrime. Yeah, is a lofty goal, of course. But that's you strive for things that seem impossible, and then if you miss, you've still done some great things.
Well, you
So
see
I
that with you
love
with you
that.
folks. I'm very familiar with Abnormal. Love you folks. You got a great reputation. A lot of our customers leverage you. And again, finding right companies that are the right fit for an organization, based on doing things the right way, right? And that's really where you folks have made your niche at, being able to do that. And so, same missions, just different technologies and different ways of doing things, but a core component, that we leverage every day. So we have a number of customers that leverage you folks.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and we're grateful to partner with you guys on that and help protect companies. Right at the end of the day, that's our job. That's your job. That's my job. Ever all of us in cybersecurity to make the world a safer place and help companies protect their employees and their customers.
Yeah, and it's such a you're talking about it being an exciting time. I've been in this industry now for I think 28, 29 years now, which I'm getting old. But kids are all getting out of the house and everything, and I got a teenager that's going to be in college next year, and so looking at kind of the history of cybersecurity, it's so much fun to see the evolution of where we used to be to where we are 10 years ago to where we are today. And what I can say is historically we have gotten better at defense. Like it's harder for us on the offensive side to break into organizations than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And that's a great metric because we are improving now. It's far from perfect. We have a long ways to go, but it's making sure that an organization understands what they need to do with cybersecurity and continues to propel that program up in nature. And so a lot of technologies that come out can help. And now zero trust is a great example. Big buzzword in the industry, but from a principles perspective, it makes a lot of sense, right? Minimize your attack surface, which stops the spread of lateral movement, which protects you against these catastrophic large data breaches that you see out there. So from a principle perspective, but it's really not a different model than what we had when Marcus Random released the first firewall. He released the first firewall so that you could do network segmentation, and to minimize the damage and scope that, an organization has. So, I think, when we talk about what companies need to do, it's still the basics. Now, the basics don't mean it's easy. Like vulnerability management is probably one of the hardest
Ugh.
security programs in an organization. I mean, having to deal with hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities, how that applies to your likelihood and probability from a risk perspective. How do you fix your change control process? Who owns a third party middleware, and external resources or cloud providers? There's so many details that go into vulnerability management. But when it comes down to it, network segmentation, multi-factor authentication, good password hygiene and use. I don't use that word hygiene very often, so I can't believe I said that. I try not to use the buzzwords. But in vulnerability management, hardening your external perimeters, proper DMZ infrastructure, becoming a service provider for your customer around just the applications that they need to be successful, not a full service provider of all ports and protocols and access to your entire internal network. Like these are the basics that make real good strategies and senses that are still applied today that have been around for 15 years. But companies really struggle with that. And so they're looking for quick fixes. So like, hey, if I buy this product here, it's going to accelerate my security program 3 years, but it really doesn't because they're not doing the basics. And so we still got to go back to those core values of, how do we minimize threat to our organization? And if an event does occur, that it's minimized and contained within a certain small subset of our infrastructure versus the entire thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at what Microsoft Copilot did for so many folks, right? It just shined a beacon on some bad practices that many of us have been doing for quite some time, right? If you weren't doing the blocking and tackling, the simple things well in terms of, access management, suddenly when Microsoft kindly turned that on for you, thanks for that. And now folks could issue queries and find things that,
They shouldn't be able to.
security
Yeah.
through obscurity is a real thing. We'd been doing
Yep.
that for quite some time. They didn't know they had access, but now it's automatically returning the data that they have had access to for a long time. It really put us all in a bad place.
Yeah.
So
And what was great about Copilot and what continues to be great about Copilot is that it's probably one of the most granular security control AIs that we have out there today, and it's seamlessly integrated into your environment. But as you mentioned, if you're not structured the right way, or you don't have good governance in place to find those or to prevent those, then it could be catastrophic to your organization. So with new technology, with what's the Spider-Man quote? With
great
great
power
power
comes
comes
great
great
responsibility.
responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Same thing happens when you start to leverage a lot of these newer technologies out there is that, it will uproot a lot of the bad security practices you had. And when you look at cloud infrastructure, a lot of companies just went to the cloud, like YOLO cloud, didn't have any type of good governance structures around it. You can spin up your own instances. it's like a flat network basically across your entire environment that you're just putting on the cloud that everybody can now have access to. You know, there has to be good structures in place that you put prior to you adopting this, and that's where I see, I would say the biggest lack of security controls that I see today is with AI. There's not a good governance structure around, hey, what are your developer? How can your developers leverage, AI to help assist them in developing and getting your product out faster or new features out faster, things like that, in a good governance structure? How do we protect the models in our infrastructure and organization from being poisoned or prompt injections or things like that? How do we, tackle all of these issues? We're slow on that area there, and my concern is that AI is such a hype cycle right now, not just in our industry, but every single industry that's out there today. I was just on a panel here in Akron last week, and we were talking. There was a bunch of folks on the AI panel, and it was a very diverse population based on industry vertical. We had some folks that were in marketing and leveraging AI, that were in sales and marketing, and leveraging AI accounting. And each one of them was consistent in the fact of saying, we're hiring people now that have to have an understanding of AI in their job, or else we do not hire them, right? So it's part of what our businesses are leveraging every single day now. So we have to have a good governance structure around how companies can successfully leverage this in their environment, or else we're going to be left behind, or it's going to be, the cat's going to be out of the bag, and we're not going to be able to protect it, and we're going to have a massive issue. And there's not a lot of discussion around, like, where most of this Gen AI stuff is pulling its data from is from things like Stack Overflow or social media sites, development, programming standards. There are ways of poisoning that type of data to give you bad malicious code, that could potentially be injected into your development workforce that then now is being used by production code that goes out to your customers. And so, there's not a lot of talk around how do you even protect against that. And so we have to get ahead of that in the security industry to really try to protect what's happening in the future and what will continue to happen in the future. Now, attackers aren't leveraging that right now, but they will be. It's, again, cloud took about 2 years for attackers to really consistently adopt cloud, because they were having so much success with on-prem and ransomware events and things like that. But then they shifted to the cloud. We're seeing the same thing happen in the AI field, and that's going to be another form of attack coming in the near future, not late future.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So do you feel like attackers have the edge today, or defenders have the edge today when it comes to AI in particular?
I think it's both. I think it's both equally at this point. I think there's a slight edge on the offensive side, because offensive side is very much like a YOLO, right? They spin up things very quickly. They don't need a massive production, life cycle, with agile workflow and policies and procedures and standards. So, for me, like a red team is a great example. To stand up a red team infrastructure used to take us like 3 to 4 days to build our infrastructure, our, new domains, certs, our C2 infrastructure, our phishing campaigns, things like that. And we've automated that completely to where it takes like 5 minutes, to set up a new infrastructure for a customer that we're going after, right?
Thanks
So,
to infrastructure as code, right?
right, infrastructure as a code. So now we can spin up our infrastructure in 5 minutes, which gives us a ton of synergy. And it can be dynamically written code every single time that's completely generated, that we don't have to have, our top researcher go and write this thing that's going to go execute on a high end customer, right? So it has definitely made things much faster for offense to prototype, to build things out quicker, which I do think gives them a slight edge. At the same time, I always go back to there was a tweet that happened. It was a number of years ago, from James Lee or Egypt. He was a phenomenal, brilliant security researcher. Was on the Metasploit development team. I hold him in high regard. And someone had made a comment. It only takes an attacker or one system that you didn't know about to compromise your entire organization, which is true. What Egypt responded back with was, but it only takes one detection that the attacker didn't know about to completely trip up that attacker, right? And that's where I really go to, is like, we can have multiple layers of defensive capabilities built in that the attacker doesn't know about, to really bridge that gap and give the defenders the edge when it comes to it. And one of the areas that, we don't talk enough about in this industry, that is one of the, it scares us as attackers, but nobody talks about it, is deception capabilities. To build canary tokens and honey tokens and things like that throughout your entire environment. Think of these as very difficult landmines to spot, right? And we'll run into customers, and it's very few of them. I would say it's sub 3%, 2% of customers have deception capabilities built into it. But almost like over 90% of the time, we are tripping those deception capabilities in an environment because we can't discern what's real and what's not. So, if there's a run as script that a PowerShell script that gets executed when a user logs in that injects a high level service account into memory with a fake password, and then they see a failed login attempt of that account, it's 100% probability that an attacker is on your machine. There is never going to be a false positive of that account in your environment. Sure as heck that somebody is on that system and that machine is compromised, and you snag them so quick with those types of detection. Same thing for like fake certificate authorities, SPN accounts, things that are common attackers, broadcasting locally multicast name resolution protocol, NetBIOS name services to get things like, responder and VEI, to detect those in their environment. Like there's so many things that we can do to really flip the script on attackers that make it very, very, very difficult for them to be successful in your environment. We don't focus on those things that are unique to our own environment. Like it's just like we're so busy with all these fires that we have to fight. Every single day we have so many projects. There's 10,000 things we have to get done. How am I going to have time to build deception capabilities in my environment? Or how am I going to find time to sift through these logs to find user behavior that's specific to our organization or environment that we can now build those off of to trip those attackers off of because I have all these other responsibilities. So I would say our biggest crux is time to focus on the right things and reprioritizing ourselves to focus on those versus the firefights that we have to do every single day. And that's why when I go into organizations all the time, I'm like, hey, you got these two brilliant folks over here that are just absolute ninjas, but they're in 17 calls a day.
Right.
17 calls. They can get nothing done. I'm like, take those two out of rotation for calls and have them just be brilliant over here. And if they can do that, and handle the rest of their workload with the calls and everything else, I guarantee you your security program next time you come in here, it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to manage. And I think that's what we have to look at. If you're a chief security officer in an organization, find those brilliant folks and take them off of that rotation of firefighting. Just have them focus on really cool stuff that make your security program way better.
I love it. I love it. Also, quick shout out to John Strand and the team at SANS. And Mick Douglas was my instructor. I went to the active defense and countermeasures course there years ago now, to show you how I don't think that course exists today. But that's exactly what we were doing, right? Is building those kind of honey tokens, these wild things that would give us a quick flag, trip ups, right, for the bad guys, that they would undoubtedly trip wires throughout the organization that they would set off if they came traipsing through and didn't know the landscape like our employees did. So
Yeah, first of all, John,
super
John,
useful.
John and Mick, amazing human beings. Love them to death. John and Mick are some of my best friends. Mick is awesome. I think Mick is actually the first talk I ever saw. This was probably 15, 20 years ago on deception, and so Mick gets the credit to fame there for when I started really focusing on and why it made sense to me. Was one of his early presentations. I think it was like a NOLACon or something like that in Cleveland.
Goodness, yeah,
It was a crazy conference where like you'd have like someone teach you how to sew and then teach you deception capabilities. It was a really weird, like conference. It was great.
I
Froggy did a
love
great
it.
job with it, but um, and John, has been such a huge advocate for that. And Black Hills Information Security, their entire team, absolutely phenomenal folks, super sharp. Some of the top in the industry. Just we have great collaboration between everybody, just kind of how we're trying to look at this. But, I wish it was just more adopted, across, more companies and organizations, because if you think about it, if they get through all of your layers of defense, your last line of defense really is deception. You don't want your deception stuff firing off all the time because that means hey, our detection program needs some work. But, attackers follow like I think it's what's hard to drill into people is they get so consumed with like scattered spider, right? And all of these other groups, right? And they're like, what are the TTPs that they're leveraging there? Well, the TTPs that they're leveraging there, while they may change over time, they're not using like heavily sophisticated 0 days. They're not using undisclosed attack patterns that they've done before in the past. It's very systematic. If you look at one of the greatest things that ever happened was the Lockheed cyber kill chain and the MITRE attack framework, right? Because it showed very specific MOs that we operate by and broke it down into very specific phases and processes that we execute. So, if we first thing we typically do is we try to get initial access into an environment, whether that's cloud or on-prem. And then from there, we try to escalate permissions. get persistence and foothold onto the system so we can maintain connections in case, they reboot the system or something happens. And then we try to move laterally across environments to get to our objectives. So if you take those steps, there's really only a finite amount of attacks that can really happen in those types of different categorizations. And so, focusing on post exploitation scenarios as part of your security program becomes a massive strength. And then on top of that, if you take deception and you apply those to those post exploitation scenarios, everything from persistence to initial access to privilege escalation, to lateral movement, you can build a really strong defensive strategy around all of that based on the attack patterns that they're going to use. I mean, they're going to try to use SPNs, they're going to try to use CA abuses, they're going to try to use Mimi cats or a privilege escalation to extract, clear text passwords or password hashes out of memory. They're going to try to dump the local admin account to see if they can move laterally across other environments. They're going to sift through file shares and things like that. They're going to, try to figure out the best way they can get to their objectives. And if we put, honey creds or honey tokens or honey files or honey systems in place to go and do that, we can navigate them to a specific area that pigeonholes them and lets them know, hey, the Christmas trees are going up because these are the highest fidelity alarms that you can possibly imagine. They should never generate a false positive in your environment. And if you see that, it should automatically contain that machine and move it off of the network instantaneously. And now you just minimize the massive catastrophic data breach that you probably wouldn't have detected if you didn't have those specific things in there. And that's really where we need to innovate on and focus on in our security programs. I go into a lot of companies and they have this like massive 5-year cybersecurity program, everything from governance to everything else, right? And it's so high level and up in the weeds. And then you dive down to what they're actually focusing on. It's like, oh, this 5 years is really just 5 years of implementing this product or this new SIM or this or that, or it's implementing this next generation firewall. So we're going to gut, our Cisco expertise and our subject matter experts to go to this company, or, hey, we're Palo Alto and we want to switch to this. Do love Palo Alto, by the way, great company as well,
Mhm.
from just a firewall perspective and everything else. But again, it's where does your subject matter experts at? What are they actually focusing on, and is it making a difference in reducing, your risks and exposures in your organization? And I think that's where we really struggle with is how do we rapidly move to fix a specific issue, or to build better defensive capabilities quickly, not a year from now or 2 years from now or 6 years from now. It just needs to move much faster.
I'm so glad you touched on the post exploitations phase because, regardless of, and I've been preaching on this for decades at this point now, but regardless of how an attacker gains access, and yes, there are many, many ways. The behaviors after that begin to sort of normalize. The objectives become very clear, and the methods by which they can achieve those objectives start to narrow down. There's only so many ways you can do these kinds of things. So focusing on post exploitation is incredibly useful. Not only that, but things like honey records, right? They may also help you with an insider risk program as well, because you don't really care whether it's an internal bad guy who has a badge or it's
100%.
an external bad guy who gained access and at least is now an internal bad guy today. Because the behavior is the same. And so you're really more focused on identifying that anomalous malicious activity more than who's doing it per se.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mick, because I always get asked, well, what do you do from an insider threat perspective? And that's such a
Right.
hard, difficult thing to say. Like, there's not really a delineation or separation of what that is. Like, a malicious insider is going to do the same thing a normal attacker is going to do. They're going to access copious amounts of data. They're going to try to get access to their objectives that they want to accomplish. And so, looking at that from a patterns of behavior, and that's why I'm so focused on behavioral based understanding of organizations, because every organization is completely unique and different. They have different employees. They might have folks that are in the UK. They might, be highly on-prem or highly hybrid or highly cloud-based. They might use different CRM systems. So every fingerprint for an organization is uniquely different. And that's where we need to focus our efforts on from a defensive perspective, is understanding that normal behavior of our users and what constitutes abnormal behavior within our organization. And that's really where the strengths and the synergies start to come into place about how you can actually thwart these types of attacks. And on top of it, yes, there are preventative things that we can do to reduce that, right? So for example, our backup strategies have to be, on a segmented network that doesn't have direct access to our domain. Think of it as just it pulls the data, you can't push to it. Highly segmented zones where you have good network segmentation, account reuse isn't possible, those types of things to protect your backups so that in the event that a ransomware happens, you can recover, much more effectively. But to spot those specific things, you have a whole treasure trove of data within your own environment about how your company operates. and to look for those deviations. So if you go back to that example where the attackers were using Lua code to directly impact, dynamic scripts on an application. Why is a regular user executing Lua code in the first place? Is that normal in our environment? That's an unusual behavior, right? So those are the things that we can trigger and flag off of to be really, really solid in how we respond to these specific things. But again, it comes down to one, having the right folks that can actually do that, but two, making sure they're not overly burdened with cybersecurity. When I was in Chicago recently, we talked about
Mhm.
one of the questions I got asked was, how do I prioritize, myself in cybersecurity? And I was like, that's a great question because, and she had mentioned, she has 1,000 things she has to accomplish, but she only has the time for 10 things. I'm like, great. Well, what are the top 10 things that are the most important for you to accomplish? And that's how I run my life, by the way. And everybody's like, well, how do you still get the code and do all this when you run, multiple companies and things like that? And I said, well, it's prioritization. I don't do the thing. I don't do the things that aren't going to make my progress move forward. I don't focus on the noise of that day. I focus on trying to hit the long-term strategy stuff that will make a dent in what I'm trying to accomplish. And so I carve out time to be able to develop. I carve out time to be on engagements. I carve out time to be the CEO. So, it's really important to help compartmentalize things that are important and then the noise that's out there. The NVIDIA CEO, I loved how he actually does his day. Before he even goes into the office, before he checks his email, he meets with individuals for the specific objectives that are most important to him to get done. And either A, gets an update, or B, is directing to be able to get those things accomplished. So he's not focused on what the fire is for that day. He's focused on what his objectives are to accomplish, to get his team to align to that from a strategy perspective and get it done as fast as humanly possible, so that they can continue to innovate and continue to be the leader in the space that they're in. And then he goes into the office and then he meets with folks and does his stuff. So he might not come into the office until noon or 1 because he had other things he had to get done that were his top priority, not what he read in an email that triggered him to reconstitute that specific priority, right? And I think we get lost in the noise. And so for us, as security practitioners, try not to get caught up in the noise. And I know it's hard to do when you have bosses and things like that, but communication is key in those situations. Set an objective for yourself that's really important for your organization to get better, and communicate that of why its importance is there and why you're going to focus on that as a prioritization, and make sure that you're addressing that over time versus having to deal with, what's the quickest thing for me to get done today, that happens to be bubbling up to my priority list. It's probably
Yeah.
not a priority.
I love it. I love it. That's a key takeaway, folks. So if you jot that one down, back up a minute and re-listen to that again. There's a lot of value there, a lot of wisdom in that as well. I know Dave's also a family man and prioritizes that as well, just as I
100%.
do.
Family
Uh,
first. Yep.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I love that. Last question for me, and this is more for the founder of DerbyCon. Is there ever gonna be another, like, not maybe not DerbyCon, but like a LandCon, right? I'm just saying, Cleveland, the Northern Ohio.
The
I'm also in
land.
Northern Ohio for the listeners. Uh, the land. We gotta get the LandCon or something along those lines. What do you think?
You never know. There might be a reunion DerbyCon down the road. It's been discussed before, to have like a not a multiple, every year type of thing, but have like more of a reunion every so
Fair
often.
enough.
But we also created this year, it was our first year running it, called SmileyCon at Trusted Tech headquarters.
Okay.
And we invited, it was a non-sales event, but we invited all of our customers. We're probably going to open it up more. But we're going to stream it live as well next time. So it'll be fully live and out to the community. But they're talks that are given that are directly related to what you need to focus on for your security program for this year. So everything from technical talks to governance talks to, you name it. But they're, again, non-sales event that's focused on giving, our customers and the community, the right things to focus on from what we're seeing as far as trends and everything else. And so this year we had Diamond Dallas Page as the keynote.
Oh my gosh.
And he was awesome, just more of a motivational, get you pumped. And he
Sure.
definitely got us pumped. And so that was cool to have him come aboard this year and come to Cleveland. And I cooked him some steaks at my house, him and his wife Paige. And it's funny because he was cracking up with my son Mason. My son Mason is like, he's got this sense of humor that's just second to none. Like, and he was just cracking up DDP and Paige. And DDP texted me later, and he's like, "Dude, your son Mason is a goofball. I love him. He's great." So,
That's
but SmileyCon is kind of the old DerbyCon of times to get, because I mean DerbyCon, it's so fun to hear people's stories from that. Like,
Ugh.
you hear folks that are like, it started my career off in cybersecurity. I was successful because of DerbyCon, or like living off the land, binary and scripts got released at DerbyCon. Like all this innovation that was happening during that period of time really started a lot of it at DerbyCon because it was the conference to come to release your research, both on offense and defense. We had offense and defense tracks. We also had new to InfoSec. So if you've never given a presentation before, we're going to give you a spot to come speak at a conference to get you started in cybersecurity with something cool that you did. And it's funny because like I would sit down on those talks, the new to InfoSec talks, and I learned something new every single time for every single one of those presentations for brand new folks that just got into this industry. So I miss it a lot. And so we kind of came up with SmileyCon as a way to supplement that. And you never know, there might be a DerbyCon reunion in the future.
All
So
right, all right. Well, listen, I'm full in for SmileyCon. If you ever open that up to external folks, let me know. I would love to come up. It's an hour away from me. I will come up there in a moment.
consider you invited.
Oh
I will
my
get you an
gosh, I
invite list
love it.
for it.
I
Yep,
love it.
absolutely.
I think GurkCon is probably the closest thing I'm seeing today to the kind of the spirit of DerbyCon. I love
Yeah.
what's going on up there in Grand Rapids.
It's this week actually, and Jamie and Chris, they are amazing human beings. They always offer me a spot to come and speak. I couldn't afford you with the travel schedule this week, but GurCon is one of my favorite conferences of all time. Very much in that we're going to stay a hacking security community type feel, which is a lot of the old DEF CON from days and things like that, right? And they really encapsulated that. And it's funny because DerbyCon and GurCon started at the exact same time. So technically we were competitors, but we always worked with one another. Like we'd always give each other boosts. We could always cross promote. It's always a community driven thing. And
I like
Jamie
it.
and Chris just do an amazing job with that conference. I'm huge fans of them and what they've been able to accomplish there. And every time I go there, I just have so much fun. Just reuniting with friends I haven't seen in a while, but also the talks are absolutely fantastic. If you haven't a chance to get the GurCon, I'd heavily recommend it. It's definitely up there.
Yeah, them and hackers teaching hackers down in just south of Columbus, Ohio.
Oh yeah.
John Harper and the gang there, Evan. There's just so many great
Steel City
folks.
Con, another great one in Cincinnati. So
Yeah, what's the
yeah,
name of that one?
Steel City Con.
Okay. All right. I was not familiar with that one. I'll check that one out. So, at any rate, I know I've taken so much of your time, Dave. You're so generous, and I appreciate it. If our folks are listening, and this has been an amazing conversation, it's gone all over the place, but they can only take one thing away from it. What would you have that be for them?
Learn AI as part of your job right now. That would be my biggest takeaway. It's something that will be more and more required for your job position as you go along, and think of it as an augmentation, not a replacement. So the efficiencies that you're going to be able to gain, speed to what you're doing, how fast you can get to there. It will be absolutely a synergy for what you're trying to accomplish, but it's going to be a requirement for literally offense, defense, anything that you're focused on in cybersecurity, forensics analysis, incident response, whatever it ends up being, it will be a big component of that. So definitely leverage yourself. If you want to get started in it, there's some really great online resources. So NVIDIA has an amazing free AI course that you can learn directly from the source, NVIDIA being the largest provider of GPU processors for AI. There's also a great application called Cursor AI, and you can literally write applications at your fingertips. So learn how prompt engineering works, prompt coding, things like that. Anthropotic Claude is really good for coding applications fully. Obviously, ChatGPT and Grok from more of a generative AI type of perspective is really good as well. I know Microsoft just recently released integration into Claude and Grok as of last week. So it's not just using OpenAI as part of that. So you have a few different models you can select from. Know the synergies, know what they're good at, what they're not good at. There's some really cool stuff like ChatGPT just came out with Pulse, which will help you overnight. If you have a problem that you're working on that you can't figure out, you can basically just pop it in, and then when you wake up in the morning, you'll have all of your answers ready for you to help you kind of start the day fresh. They also, if you look at like the synergies of different ones, like there's deep research options. So if you have to do like even if it's like marketing, like you want to see what your competitors are doing and where you compare to them, it'll do deep research and it might take, a few hours. You'll come back with a full prototype of like what your competitors are doing, what you should be focusing on. Same thing for cybersecurity, like do deep research on this specific topic of scattered spider. What are their techniques? And you get a full research paper essentially written for you to be able to go and do a deep dive into things that you may not know about. I'll tell you one thing that has helped me a ton is when I'm doing the news.
Hmm.
I used to have to research topics very heavily before I go on
Yeah.
the news, right? And
And they called you
ChatGPT and
just
stuff like
moments before, right?
right. Yeah, so I'd have to like, spend 2 or 3 hours before me going on the news to make sure that I can handle any questions that they would have on the news. And so now I can do a deep research, piece, and it gives me a full, background and data analysis of whatever my topic is, and I can learn from that. Obviously, I have to leverage, my expertise too, but it gives me a good understanding about what I'm going to be talking about over a specific instance. So it's become a massive tool for me. I don't even use search engines anymore. I literally use, ChatGPT or Grok or whatever to really kind of pin down that information, allow me to research it. I'm huge into medical studies too, like research on, like longevity and health and things like that. So I'll take a research paper that has a lot of like data and statistics and metrics that I don't even understand and have it dumb it down for me so that I can at least have a good understanding on what that specific research paper is actually saying. So it's augmented me a lot, and I'll upload my blood panels and my lipids, directly to it, and it'll interpret like, hey, here's how you can improve these specific lipids in the future. Here's how you can do certain things. So, you can leverage it in a lot of different ways in your life, not just cybersecurity, but definitely get comfortable with it because it's here to stay.
I love it. I love it. Mr. David Kennedy, the one, the only, the immortal.
I
We
got
are
you,
so
Mick.
grateful. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it, for being back, my first repeat guest. So I'm so grateful for your time. If folks want to learn more about Trusted Sec and binary defense and the things you're doing over there, where can they find you?
BinaryDefense.com, TrustedSec.com, and on X, Hacking Dave. So I'm always posting, either cybersecurity stuff or weightlifting stuff. So, either way, supplements company. So, wide array of things you'll get with me. Sorry for the shirtless pictures of me like transforming my body, but it's one of those things where, I like to share my experiences and hopefully help others as they're coming along. I used to be, very, very obese and overweight with a lot of health issues and really took control of it and homed in on it. And now got it down to a science. So, try to share that experience of how I was able to accomplish that. IT and security being heavily sedentary lifestyle, really trying to change it. So, like to share my mistakes. I make a lot of them to help others, to learn from those so they don't hopefully make those same mistakes and, become a better person. So, but as you mentioned, Mick, it's all about family. So there's a lot of family stuff on there as well. My daughter is in volleyball. My son's in basketball. My other son's in basketball. So, going to all those games and enjoying the time that I have, which is why I cut back my travel schedule quite a bit, so I could be home with the family. So,
I love it. Well, go Cavs. Go
go
Brown.
Cavs! Can't see
Go
Guardians
Brown.
anymore, unfortunately. That was a good run, though. Good
Uh,
run.
exactly. But no, we appreciate it. So thank you so much, Dave. Folks, this has been Stock Unlocked, Tales from the Cybersecurity Front Lines. I'm your host, Mick Leach, reminding all you cyber defenders out there, keep fighting the good fight. You're the tip of the spear, so stay sharp out there, friends. Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to like and subscribe and check out our other Stock Unlocked episodes, including Dave's first one. We'll see you all next time. Thank you, folks.